So Keay, I think you and I have found ourselves in Clubhouse rooms together. I'm Ramsey. It's really nice to meet you, to the extent that we can here. And I'm really grateful to everyone for joining us today on this. This is going to be a really fun panel. I'll give you the brief thing what I've done already. This panel is designed to be a safe space to futurecast and really let it rip. These are hot takes. They don't need to be like your final answer. They don't need to be data-driven. They're hot takes. They're fiction-like. They're supposed to be a little out there. They're supposed to be a little, let's see what you got. Because those moments of imagining what can be have a disproportionate impact in shaping what will become. So this really is one of those times where we can let ourselves a little extra rope, so to speak, to imagine a little farther than we might otherwise be comfortable in good company.
Great. I look forward to hearing what's people have got to say. I don't have pre-prepared questions because we're all in such different areas, and I'm going to bounce off of what you say. So I do hope that you're going to be really provocative.
Yes, the goal is at least to give everyone that freedom to do as they see fit, unconstrained. Mm-hmm. Everyone will get about 3 minutes, go for it. And then from there, I think we can bounce the conversation around. I'm going to go ahead and leave now. We got some people coming in and joining. So Keay, it's over to you, man.
Who would like to go first with your hot takes?
Ooh. I have a bit of a dystopic story that I'm not certain if that's the ideal one to go up first, but it is a story rather than, I'm not certain how the others, I was just enjoying listening to what Ramsey was describing on the whole. I don't know, Conor, Nana, how your takes are formed.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to go first. I will say, like, I will try and get a little bit more further out there. I think mine might be a little modest, but I'm going to try and put them a little bit further ahead. Just in terms of looking at, you could have gone in so many directions. I think I could put some ideas around what different governance mechanisms will be out there in terms of how we've approached the regulation of AI. And based on conversations at the World Economic Forum that we've learned from, and then also kind of a more where we are in terms of economic disparities and sort of the concentrations of power and economic power and political power that are forming around the acceleration and development of AI. So I can help. I think that would probably help set things a little bit, but then I would want you to go even much further than that, and you and Nana.
I mean, yeah, I think that sounds okay. Mine might be a little modest, but I think it's a great ground to set before you close up, Andra. So let's go for it.
Okay.
Sounds great. I'm trying to discover from the organizers whether we are on live yet. Could someone please respond in the chat if we are or if we're not? Okay, wonderful. Thanks for letting us know that. We're just chatting casually. Happy to be here. This is a really fun topic, but it's also it can be seriously dystopic. So what we're going to do, we're just going to kick off really quickly with a 3-minute hot take from each of our wonderful panelists in their respective areas. I'd ask each of you to just intro yourself with 15 seconds of who you are, and then give us your 3 minutes. And without wasting any further time, so that we can have as much Q&A as possible, could we please start? Perhaps we'll start with Andra.
Okay, I'm managing director of Silicon Valley Robotics, which is formed in 2010 to help shepherd in the emerging innovations in robotics technologies, not just in the Bay Area, but more broadly. I'm also a visiting scholar at the CITRIS People and Robots Lab, and I'm really pleased to see one of my colleagues at CITRIS, Brandy Nunnick, who's a policy expert, has also attending today too. So she's very, very up to the mark there. And as you gather, my is not purely on AI, but I'm going to dive straight in. AI is absolutely going to increase the income and opportunity gaps in the USA by over-optimizing systems for profit. Meet Sophia, who lives in a city in the USA where there's good internet, cell service, even 5G. Whereas Isabella lives in USA, which still has no slow or very intermittent internet access. In 10 years' time, there will still be programs to get the schools and hospitals online, but kids are sitting in the car parks, crashing the critical care systems, trying to get their homework done. If Sophia, our city girl, is lucky enough to be smart, middle class, upwardly mobile, most likely white, entrepreneurial, attractive, and under the age of 40, then she will get a role in a tech company, because everything will be a tech company in 10 years' time, with an infinite demand for young, tireless, family-free, naive 20-somethings who don't realize how badly they're getting screwed over by the system until they've been resignated. If she's really lucky, she's going to be working in a tech company that's going to make the world a better place, at least until such time as that tech company goes bankrupt or becomes very profitable for a few, with a lot of lawyers, a lot of lobbyists, and a giant carbon footprint. But lucky Sophia has everything she needs, from healthcare to groceries to housing, provided through her company-authorized discount plans, whereas an unlucky city Sophia is living on universal basic income, but has to spend all day on her cheap tablet navigating chatbots and phone robots, trying to shop or find a dentist. Everything is either forcing ads on her, or it has been gamified so that she's constantly doing content labeling labor for our voracious data sets. Whereas Isabella in the cut-off country regions can't perform data labor. So I reckon she's going to be batch transported into the city to provide week-long shifts of labor, cleaning, nursing, retail, or restaurant assistance, that kind of domestic service type labor. With AR training and AI oversight, you don't really need continuity anywhere anymore. And it's going to be cheaper to transport low-paid wage workers and stuff them into pod camps for a week than it will be to fix the housing crisis or to raise everybody's wages. But if Isabella is smart and studies robotics, biotech, or chemistry, then maybe with a grant or two, or through an impact investment fund, then she can rent a disused local shopping mall, hook it up to a private satellite network, and convert it into a lithium or rare materials extraction plant, or an additive manufacturing cell for local products, or a vertical indoor aquaculture or insect or algae farm. I really do believe that robotics can fix many of the problems that AI and the internet are going to exacerbate in the coming decade. The incentives and disincentives around communications and computation are converting control of data into profit for the few. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg for how our current AI systems will be incorporated into everything. And I think it's AI apocalyptic. But there are so many ways in which we could be able to deploy precise, customized, and individualized changes to the molecules and materials of our world, that there are enormous new possibilities emerging. And I believe that the incentive structure is different when we're making changes in real matter. The costs and the risks are higher, and we will be more vigilant. We will have to be. So I'm Team Robotopia, not Team AI Apocalypse. Thank you.
Thank you, Andra. What a hopeful, bright future we have in front of us. Conor, are you equally negative on our future? Please tell us about yourself.
Thank you to Keay, and thank you, Andra, for getting us kicked off with such a great provocation. Yeah, my name is Conor Sanchez. I work at the World Economic Forum on the AI and machine learning platform for a little over 2 years. I've been there, and we focus on really trying to bring a multi-stakeholder and agile approach to policymaking, particularly around policies that will shape the future of artificial intelligence. And I would say that I am somewhere in between. And I think, based on our conversations in the communities that we've built over the last 3 years, we've brought together a mixture of experts in computer science and AI and policymakers and C-suite executives to think about these issues. And the world we see in 2031 is a world in which we find ourselves where AI is ubiquitous, it's seamless, it's practically invisible. It really has come into every domain that it promises to come into. And so in some ways, I don't even know in 2031 we'll really call it AI, or if something else will be that next big thing that we call AI. But we have seen it move into a considerable amount of decision-making capacities, ranging from health, law, education, finance, and these decisions obviously have enormous implications for people around the world where it's reaching, particularly for vulnerable communities, those who already face discrimination or other issues around inequity. So I think in 2031, I see a world where we have managed to push the needle in a number of ways based on some trends that we're seeing today. One of those is AI literacy has gone way up. People know and take seriously what's at stake. They know what the good that it's doing and the potential for it to do. They know it's not Shangri-La, but it's also not Pandora's box. Governments, especially the ones that have done a good job of executing regulation around AI, have taken a risk-based approach to AI regulation. When they look back in 2031, they'll look back at 2021 as the year that was a pivotal moment. This was the year that the European Commission proposed AI regulations, and they really started to put AI into context and started to categorize where the risks were highest and kind of where they were more minimal and where there was maybe limited risk involved. And governments were also they used that 10-year period to learn from their citizens. So one of the biggest questions that people have about AI, one of the biggest worries is around fairness. But then the biggest question is, what does fairness actually mean? It means something different to you and I. It means something different from somebody who lives in the US, from somebody who lives in South Africa or Myanmar. But governments do that job, particularly in, we can say in liberal democracies. They have done a good job of engaging citizens ostensibly to look at these issues and are drawing in more of the population to think about what does fairness mean to their respective constituencies. We have also looked at, we've learned to take advantage of norms shaping mechanisms. So AI governance, the governing of AI, ensuring responsible AI doesn't just happen in the domain of parliaments and legislatures, but it also happens with procurement officials at a government agency and what they decide to buy. And it happens with certification labels that get placed on AI so that people know and can trust what AI they're getting. And then my fourth and last hot take, I think, is just that in 2031, you'll have seen not just more international cooperation around AI, but intersectoral cooperation. Particularly, you will see growth from what you've seen come out in the last year with GPI, and you will see more and more governments working in partnership with companies, and not just large corporations, but small and medium sized enterprises, to ensure that they are producing and embracing responsible AI. One last thing, I think what we may not have learned to do so well is how to deal with the ensuring the equitable distribution of the benefits emanating from AI. In 2031, I think we will hit this this moment when we really are starting to see maybe some of the things that Andra laid out of really just powerful concentrations that require some major innovative thinking around how countries take care of their citizens, whether it's something popularly espoused like UBI or negative income taxes. One number of policies that will certainly be experimented with at that time.
Wonderful. Or not so wonderful in some cases. Do we have Nana? She's disappeared from my screen.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you, can't see you.
I'd like to apologize. I've apparently lost my video capacity, so right now I'm just working with audio.
Oh, that's all right. We can hear you.
Okay, so I'll move forward that way. Hopefully you caught glimpses of me before this catastrophe struck. But anyway, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be in the company of my fellow panelists and to have the attention of our viewing audience. My name is Nana, and I'm a bioethicist. And I like to describe that as someone who examines ethical issues surrounding advances in science, technology, and medicine. And so in that capacity, I'm really focused on humanistic impacts, and minimizing harm will always be my North Star. That said, I think that we've pointed to and accounted for a number of applied AI cases during this event alone to admit that oftentimes harm is unavoidable. So harm is unavoidable and time is fleeting. And in my hot take from 2031, governments have been forced to take a centralized role when it comes to AI responsibility. Because you see, before COVID, self-regulation and a decentralized tech policy landscape was the norm. Over time, however, neither of those two things, so self-regulation or a decentralized policy landscape, could withstand the pressures of responsibility that came with large, widespread, digital public service delivery, especially in the face of subsequent modern pandemics or even climate emergencies. And so ultimately, that called for this federal role to help audit a bank of algorithms that were earmarked to help in the delivery of public services. So think of maybe your vaccine distribution or even child welfare determinations. And so in 2031, some things have changed for the better, right? Autonomous vehicles have become more commonplace, and that's enabled previously excluded populations, say your elderly or the mobility impaired, to travel autonomously while protected by state-issued guidances around shared liability. And that now includes this fuller spectrum of stakeholders that includes the automated system itself. So yes, some things have changed for the better, but again, harm remains unavoidable. And so in 2031, a generation that grew up with and not into technology as disruptive as AI is coming of age. And in that time, their privacy has become collateral damage as we, quote unquote, build back better from automated decision-making. And oh yeah, we never really quite found our way back from social distancing. It all is very weird. All that to say that part of AI responsibility in the time leading up to 2031 included some critical thought around the society we would be forced to exist in once this powerful technology became fully ubiquitous. And that wasn't just on the individual or even government. That was on everybody. And unfortunately, in my hot take, we dropped the ball. And the vision is kind of terrifying. So I'll stop there. Sorry to not end on a more positive note.
Wow. Okay. This is thank you. This is wonderful in terms of bringing out the issues. So I'm Keay. I am a longtime AI professor. I've been doing AI research for over 35 years, pioneered things like Google Translate, Microsoft Translate, Yahoo Translate, that sort of thing. Work heavily in, not only on language, but also machine learning of music and computational creativity and AI ethics and society. One of the things that I would say to Conor's point about what AI, will we have moved on from AI? There's a very long-standing old saying we have in the field of AI, which is once we figure out how to do it, it's no longer AI. AI is that part of computer science that focuses on what we don't yet know how to do. Successively, all the things we figured out over the decades have been pushed off to sort of, okay, that's not real AI. That's just fancy predictive regression models. And that continues to be the case. So there's an equation today of AI very often with machine learning, which is false. AI is a field of inquiry, just like physics or anything else. We have many, many different models, each trying to model a different aspect of reality, but it's instead of modeling physics, it's working on modeling human behavior and what we consider to be intelligent human behavior. Although recent events make me really wonder about that. The thing about AI today that is heavily based on the ability to learn is that it's an exponential amplifier of all things humanity. And that means the good and the bad. And to me, this means that we're looking at exponential amplification of age-old tendencies, but it's the first time that we've had many of these. So wealth disparity and the opportunity inequity have plagued us for a long time, but it's being exponentially amplified by the tendencies of AI that give each individual human much more power. And so therefore those who already have the capital, the resources, have an exponentially greater amount of that because it's now being amplified by AI, and that increases the inequality. And that does indeed have impact on the job market, as we see more and more jobs shifting toward the away from the kinds of traditional manual labor jobs and automatable repetitive jobs. This means that jobs are shifting more and more to those that involve interpersonal work, where the human element is important, and to increasingly advanced intellectual work, whether that's advanced research, creative artists, and so forth. What do I see? 2031, it might take longer, it might be 2041 or longer. One of the things that I see, I'm going to try to present my dystopic vision in optimistic terms. So I'm going to try to say what I think can be solved. And I think the solution is also AI, because in the face of these exponential problems, the only tool that we have that has the potential to scale exponentially, to tackle that, is again itself AI. And so for the intellectual work, which today is radically undercompensated, so artists and scientists, professors like me, few of us who elected to stay in academia, are paid far less. And so one of the age-old issues is, what do we do in an era where more and more people are moving toward intellectual work, that their output is intellectual output? Do they get poorer and poorer? I believe the solution will be to re-examine really closely and possibly start chucking the notion of property as the metaphor for intellectual output. This is a very recent invention, came out of one small corner of the world in Western Europe. It's alien to many cultures, but what has happened is that increasingly it's showing its limits. As AIs produce more intellectual output by themselves, more and more there's a question of, well, who owns that output? I think that AIs can be used instead to start tracking the provenance of new intellectual output, and to see, when you create new work, who is going to be credited, who did you, not just, who did you sample, who did you remix? But AIs can actually do that. In fact, primitive versions are already operating on sites like YouTube. If you try to put up something where you've inserted a sample of some other musician's music, it will detect that. And so if we can do a sort of back propagation of credit, and then reward people who have contributed to that by sharing the profits from that, then we can create a different metaphor for intellectual work, that instead of today's property-based metaphor, which causes intellectual workers to try to grab everything they've got and to keep it a proprietary secret, or to try to limit and create artificial scarcity, for example, with NFTs. Instead of that, it would incentivize those intellectual creators to share as widely as possible whatever they come up with, because the more people use what you've come up with, the more the rewards come back to you. So that is my optimistic view of what I see today as increasing dystopia on intellectual work, which becomes more important in the AI era as traditional jobs disappear, and can help to address wealth disparity. Scoring of individuals. We all hear people throwing around the phrase social credit score right and left, although I have to tell you that 99.9999% of people who throw around that phrase actually have no idea how the social credit score system works in China. And I've done long sessions explaining that. It's very different. If you ask most people, they say, what is the system? How does it work in practice? They'll sort of pause and think, and then say, well, I don't know the details, but, and then they'll launch into a Black Mirror episode from Hollywood, which bears almost no recall to what's actually going on. Really, that story, the Black Mirror story, what that reflects more is our own system, where today scoring of every one of us individually is being scored left and right by the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and so on. And those scores are being then aggregated through companies most of us have never heard of, and they're used in many ways that actually do affect things that we've heard about earlier today, like your bank loan applications, or your job applications, or your college applications, and so forth. It's completely non-transparent. We have social credit scoring today in the US and in the West that is completely hidden from us. Nobody can tell you how you got your Google score, how you got your Amazon score, how you got your Facebook score. And nobody can tell you which companies are making decisions that impact your life based on those scores. My optimistic view of this is that that will be made more transparent, that we will get our heads around this. Regulations will be written to demand that our scores actually are made transparent, to us at least. And possibly we may ask, should scoring of individuals be in the hands of for-profit companies that don't really bear the responsibility for the social impact, or do we want more government roles because government is at least supposed to be accountable to the people? Another place where AI is amplifying things is misinformation. We are seeing vastly, exponentially increased amounts of polarization. It's driven, of course, by AI-powered social media engines, recommendation engines, search engines. And although people have talked about misinformation and malinformation and disinformation and the differences between that, the most important problem, dysfunction today, is not being talked at all about. And that is what I call neg information. Neg information refers, unlike all of those others, refers to information that is true, but it's a partial truth. And it is being propagated unintentionally, unknowingly, negligently by all of us every time we share things. And it is a form of willful negligence that in traditional times was just, okay, that's taken for granted, but that problem is being exponentially amplified by the algorithms, the recommendation algorithms that power social media. Most of meaning lies not in what is actually said. Those of us who work in natural language understanding have to come to grips with this all the time. Most of meaning actually lies in what's not said. And our brains, with all of our evolutionary unconscious cognitive biases, are filling in all the blanks with our biases. Human brains are autocomplete on steroids. And the way we autocomplete is through our own biases. We've heard a lot about bias in machine learning and AI. The converse part of that is the problem of bias in our own human minds. And that is being amplified. One of the things that is biggest in amplifying that today is what I call algorithmic censorship. And to understand why I say that, so any recommendation AI today, it can be Google, it can be Amazon, Facebook, whatever you like, Insta, every single algorithm that chooses what to show you. If it chooses, okay, today I'm going to show you these 20 posts or these 50 items, by definition, that algorithm is also choosing which billion posts today am I not showing you. That is a censorship decision that the algorithm is making. And there's no getting around that because none of us have time to read a billion posts a day that are being posted. We must recognize that algorithms, by necessity, are making censorship decisions on what not to show us. And because algorithms at YouTube, at Google, at Amazon, and so forth make more money for their companies by showing you more of what you are predisposed with all of your biases to want to see, therefore it drives additional polarization. It drives additional neg information. It chooses the parts of the crucial context not to show you because your confirmation bias doesn't want to see that, doesn't want to click on that, doesn't want to spend time watching it. And that increases polarization. We need to have serious conversations about what we do in terms of regulating the acceptable ranges of algorithmic censorship. What percentage of recommendations should be shown that expand your horizons, that don't just pander to your confirmation biases and reinforce your particular polarization into more and more extreme separate silos? Whenever I ask humans that, they get really uncomfortable. Nobody wants to put a number on it. I've run exercises where I really get people to try to focus on that, and a few brave souls start volunteering. Okay, 70% of the recommendations should be as is today, and today means pander to existing biases. And 30% should try to expand your horizons and show you parts of the context that are crucial, fill in some of the blanks that you're not hearing, and use that to sort of try to get over the polarization and siloing that we're seeing today. Other people say it should be 20%, 80%. Other people say 50-50. People are going to have different opinions. I believe the solution here is for us to have a national conversation and at least figure out what is a range of acceptability. Because today we're not even thinking about this problem. And by 2031, if the polarization continues, we're going to have serious social problems, not just domestically, which we already see, not only in the US, but in many other countries, the UK, Hong Kong, where I am right now, many other places, but also geopolitically, internationally between countries, the emergences of new Cold Wars. These are not things that we can survive, because in this AI era, we are in an era where we're seeing all the same kinds of polarization that we saw predating each of the previous world wars, the building of new giant alliance blocks. And let's all remember the previous World War, nuclear arms hadn't even been invented yet, much less today the incredible destructive capacity of not just nuclear arms, but genetic, bioweapons, which are also powered by AI, and AI-powered warfare, autonomous warfare, and so forth. This is not a situation that humanity can survive. So with that, I would like to present optimism if we do the things that I said. But if we don't do those things, evolution will take care of us. So I would love to go back to our wonderful panelists and get some reactions to anything that any of the panelists have said. I see. Andra, I see you.
I'll try to dive in very, very quickly, because I know Nana's also just shared a really interesting reference, and I'm sure Conor has things to say about governance. I will point out that there are 3 very clear different global approaches to AI. And I actually believe that some of the problems that I've discussed and that we've talked about really relate to free market capitalism gone wild. And I think the US is the country that has pushed that boat the furthest it can possibly go. And I think that's not a good place to be right now when trying to deal with these, as Keay, you've just put it, these, potentially catastrophic level technologies that are going to have global impact, whether it's climate change or whether it's AI governance. So how do we get back to having a better perspective on things? But you mentioned, Keay, something about how the algorithm is an exponential accelerant for everything human. And I disagree very much with that, because I really think that functionally it amplifies some things. And in fact, I think that's closer to what you did end up saying. It amplifies some things that humans do, and it doesn't amplify others. And that's where the real values mismatch start to happen in society. So for example, we've moved our social relations forward for example, talking about Black Lives Matter. These are only recent conversations that are only starting to really bear actions quite recently. So we have a history of bad dialogues about that. And an inherent way that we use AI is training on historical data sets and then reinforcing those. So we're feeding forward the past. We're not actually taking the future and feeding it in. And I'll just mention Moravec's paradox as well, in which there are some things that AI does terribly well. And we tend as humans to define those as smart. And that's why we call it artificial intelligence. But there are many things that it does terribly, terribly badly. And those things relate to, say, flexibility, perception, manipulation, social interaction. And these tend to be things that we've historically undervalued: domestic work, social interactions, creativity. And it's the fact that we don't actually value those properly that is allowing us to fall into traps that I think are algorithmically caused, but only because the algorithm is exponentially accelerating parts of humanity and not the best parts. That's it.
Yes, I mean, I think we agree. And you know, at the meta level, the problem is that that kind of undervaluing is actually being amplified, and so it makes it worse. There are also things that are advancing. So as I mentioned, you know, the AI that we're working on in the research labs here at the University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong, and at Berkeley, where I'm at the International Computer Science Institute. And by the way, since you're at CITRIS, we should get together. But the are not the kinds of AI that people think about today, because there's all this hype about deep learning. I think AIs are going to actually be tackling a lot of those things, the kind of work that domestic workers do, that the sort of even the computational creativity. And we agonize a lot about that in music and tech discussions. What's going to become of us when AIs get as creative as humans, which is, it's not here today, but I think it's a lot closer than a lot of humans would like to believe. And so it is going to boil back down to our values. And just as with children, all of our children, yes, we hope that our children will become better than us. And we don't think, oh, it's going to be the end of society because our children are better than us. Well, okay, so as AIs start challenging our human abilities, it doesn't mean we should give up on discussing what we want society to look like. And I think that's really important. By the way, any questions, we are monitoring the chat, so please do feed questions in from the, if you're in the audience, just throw them into the chat and we're watching. But I'd like to invite Nana.
Yes, Keay, I'd like to jump in the interim. So thank you for your hot take. I'm a bioethicist with a policy orientation, but I'm very interested in the role youth plays in the development of AI, especially when it comes to policy, right? So when I hear you talk about polarization, it takes me to an essay I read. I think it was titled "The End of Forgetting." And I think it touches on this issue of polarization because I referenced in my hot take a generation that's coming up with and not into this technology, right? And a lot of their social interactions are being governed by this technology, by algorithms, and it's prematurely cementing these identities to polarizing extents, and it's depriving them of this period that we got to enjoy of making mistakes because we were in an environment that allowed for forgiveness and forgetfulness. And that doesn't really, the internet is not forgiving. It's almost forever. And so long term, what kind of society are we in when, people coming up are cementing these very polarized identities that they haven't had a chance to interrogate? And I think you alluded to the fact that government might have a role to play here in trying to govern this landscape to give us the society that we can exist in. And I mean, it makes me very concerned for that population. And I think I'll drop a quote in the chat around the youth that, sort of amplifies their importance in this discussion and how it's been understated throughout history. What was a big ticket item in the discussion around big tech and AI this year? I think it was a Senate hearing and a Section 230, right? And if you study the history of Section 230, the person who introduced it on the Senate floor actually references children as the core motivation behind this policy development that we're still reckoning with today. So it's all very interconnected, important, and I just thank you for bringing that as part of your hot take.
Thank you, Nana. Yeah, absolutely. Conor. And by the way, to the organizers, there a very interesting question from Karen Lisa Atkinson in the audience, and I wonder if it's possible to promote. Oh, okay, it just got an answer. Invite only session on. So Karen, please feel free to explain more about what you say in the chat, because we'd love to hear what you think about that question. But Conor, perhaps go ahead.
Yeah, Well, I just want to pose, I guess, a reaction and question, and maybe come back to some of what you were talking about, Keay, in terms of, the progression of AI and where it will be in 2031. This is a discussion that constantly comes up, particularly within our community that's focused on looking at envisioning positive AI economic futures. And this is with Professor Stuart Russell at UC Berkeley has sort of posited, there, with the chance, we don't know when, but at some point, whether it's 50 years to 100 years, AI is capable of really, there's just a huge amount of task encroachment, and AI is capable of doing, and there you go, you have human compatible. So he is very passionate about bringing together ideas around, what if there is, if AI is capable to do not just physical tasks but mental tasks well and better than humans, what replaces a system that is based on incentivizing people to work to produce GDP? What replaces that, and what gives people meaning when they don't have work? And so we've worked a lot with Daniel Susskind, who has a great book, A World Without Work, that investigates some of these issues and really posits that the biggest issue of the 21st century will be a question of distribution. And I think Stuart Russell's aim is really trying to get beyond sort of the knee-jerk reaction of UBI and go a little bit further from that and see what even with UBI, it's a basic income. What drives people, what motivates them, what is going to drive our purpose. And so I'd just be curious to sort of see 2031, will that be your view on kind of where we'll be at that time and at juncture of that conversation?
What would be the?
Where do you think that we would be in that conversation in terms of what AI is capable of in 2031? Will we be in terms of task encroachment? Will we be having the same debate that we're having now, or will it have progressed much further?
You know what? I think this is one of those things which is hard to predict for the following reason. 10 years ago, we would not think that we are having this conversation because deep learning. There are butterfly effects, and it takes just one lab somewhere in a university anywhere in the world that brings the next paradigm shift within AI. And I've been a part of that over the last 35 years. My thesis at Berkeley 30 years ago was one of the first to argue for machine learning approaches to getting machines to understand language, right? And it was an incredible struggle against the establishment, which was all about writing logical rules and trying to encode in logic every knowledge that people had in their common sense knowledge of the world. So paradigm shifts happen and they're unpredictable. If it happens 5 years from now, then the conversation we're going to have in 2031 will be extremely different. If it happens 11 years from now, then it'll be 2041 when we have this, the new conversation. I think what we can be certain is that it is going to happen because we are tackling all of those problems. Every time you hear a critique about how AI can't do this or that, it's because somebody has fixed in their heads that AI is equated to a particular model or family of models That would be like somebody, in the last century claiming that something is physically impossible because Newton, right? Without thinking about Einstein, relativity, or thinking about quantum physics. I think there is a necessity to understand that creativity or emotion, or all those things that Hollywood likes to tell us and we love to believe because it's warm and comforting and fuzzy, that these things are uniquely human, and machines may get super powerful at playing chess, but they'll never do this. It's just not true, and we need to wake up to that, accept it, and understand, where does society go when our artificial children become stronger than us in these things. It's still not the end of the world, but the world has to look different.
I'll just follow on from that optimistically by saying we don't always recognize the areas in which AI could be a strong or a stronger force for good. And I'm bundling together both computerization and communications technologies under the banner of AI in this instance. But we have incredibly fragmented infrastructures and utilities. And these things we would all benefit from better optimization. Whether we're looking at something as simple as, you would think it's simple, as a federal control over planes crossing the US airspace, which has traditionally been a matter of airport to airport to airport with gaps in between, and is only just starting to come under a sort of federal strategy. There are so many opportunities like that where AI strengths will be great benefits. And so I think those are the sorts of things I would like to see incentivized further.
Absolutely. I just want to, Karen or Lisa Atkinson, it says call me Lisa. Lisa, since we're unable to bring you up to discuss that very interesting point, I wonder if you could shoot me a DM. My Twitter is in my bio here. And I would love to have that conversation about AI and blockchain and Hainan's free trade zone in China. But I think it's so complicated that it doesn't make sense for us on the panel to discuss that without you in the conversation. So perhaps we could arrange that conversation on another venue, because it is a very interesting one. But I want to see if before we close, because we are running over time, Lisa is actually typing now. Lisa's writing. Okay, been working globally and with China for 35 plus years. The one thing that you find in China that holds specifically and consistently is the concern for intellectuals to bring futurists' imaginings into the workspace for tech innovation, meaning that being in the future is how we activate our imaginations to choose what to manifest eventually in the physical world. With enough presence gathered for imaginings to come to shape, then take form, means that we have more power to create imaginative AI, not based on repeating history, as Keay said, but on future possibilities. And Lisa is Canadian First Nations cultural upbringing. Very interesting. Thank you for that share, Lisa. Appreciate that, and again, wish that we had the possibility of bringing you up to chat about this, but we also we are over time. So okay, I hope that we can continue that discussion. It's a really interesting one in another forum, and perhaps we'll reach out and see if we can do that, because it is super interesting. I will agree, because in non-COVID times, I ping pong back and forth between Hong Kong and Berkeley, sometimes weekly. And I've been watching for those 30 plus years how AI develops both in the US and in the West, as well as in Asia and in China. And the attitudes are indeed extremely different. There are many things I would say about the Asian attitudes that are not dystopic. They even in movies, sci-fi movies that come out of Asia have a stronger bent towards the positive impact of AI, what AI can do to help address these, things, as Andra also said. And so I think that cross-cultural comparison and discussion could be very, very interesting. Conor, do you have more other thoughts to add?
I think that, yeah, I guess I would just close and just saying that, what there was a question around I think I saw it around involving more a younger generation and children into the conversation around responsible AI. And one thing that has been extremely important for some of the work that we've been doing at the World Economic Forum, and we've actually inaugurated this year a global youth council of young people who are engaging in this topic from around the world. And it's incredibly important. It's incredibly forgotten. We've also partnered with UNICEF to create guidelines around the usage of AI with children. And so I think just in departing, I think in 2031, one of the things that I would be most positive about is seeing governments be more inclusive in this conversation of their societies. And you're seeing that happen in small patches right now. New Zealand has been a particular leader in this, in discussing with their indigenous populations, with the Maori people, and bringing them in and having a national conversation around the use and the regulation of AI. And hopefully in 10 years' time, we'll see much, much more of that. And the more, I think that's the biggest thing that we're excited about seeing is the potential for AI to be much, much more inclusive and representative of society. Because as we know, humans are also very biased, and we are not particularly great decision makers. And ostensibly, if we get it right, and the governance mechanisms are there, AI can do a tremendous amount.
Thank you very much, Conor, and thank you to all the panelists for the wonderful shares, thought-provoking, and hopefully will lead to many more conversations and spread of these words to the point where we have the necessary conversations to enact the right changes to whether it's regulations or society or norms or expectations. This gives us some room for hope, I think. Thank you so much, Andra, Nana, Conor. Look forward to many future conversations with all of you, and thank you to the participants here who've been contributing in the chat.